I'm here at the Tampa Baywatch Marine and Education Center discussing with a panel of local experts the basics of climate change. So why don't we have you all introduce yourselves? Let's start with Kara.
My name is Kara Sarah. I work with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council as a comprehensive resiliency planner. I work in hazard mitigation planning, and I'm currently working on the first Regional Resiliency Action Plan.
My name is Dr. Daniel Guilford. I'm a climate scientist at Climate Central, which is a nonprofit organization specializing in the communication and research of climate change.
And my name is Peter Clark. I'm the president and founder of Tampa Baywatch. We organize community volunteers to restore the Tampa Bay estuary each and every day.
I'm Paul Robinson. I'm an emergency physician and pediatrician in Tarpon Springs, which is at the north end of Pinellas County. And I'm representing Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, which is a statewide group of physicians and nurses who are engaged in education about how climate change is impacting people's health today.
So what makes this Tampa Bay area so unique?
Well, we are located on the west coast of Florida. We're Florida's largest open water estuary. And there's over 3 million people that live within the watershed of Tampa Bay. And many people live within a stone throw of the bay because of the natural beauty of Tampa Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. It truly is the economic engine that drives our region. And because of that, we're all very, very blessed, and we do not take Tampa Bay or the Gulf of Mexico for granted. So when we have issues like sea level rise and climate change, it really does affect a broad segment of our community.
Want to add to that?
Yeah, I should say that the impacts that Tampa Bay region is facing are not they are not unique to the area. What is unique to the area is sort of the risks that we face as people who are living in this and are facing extreme heat, sea level rise, potential for hurricanes to strike your region. You know, these are sort of all coming together with the increase in the amount of people who live here and sort of the environment that is unique to us. That interconnection between our risks, as I say, and there's a lightning strike overhead, and our risks and the climate impacts that we're facing makes us really unique.
I think we're also unique demographically and how we have grown. And we have a large spread of people. We have rural communities, we have urban communities and suburban communities. And so our unique development pattern really contributes to some of that risk and vulnerability.
I think Florida is a beautiful place to be. When climate change impacts an area like Florida, how does that affect our economy?
I think it makes it so that there are a lot of multiple competing issues that we have to deal with at the same time. So we know that we need to house all of the people who are coming into the state, but we also feel like we're losing some of the land that we already have to some of the increasing climate risks, as there are more flood risk areas that we would prefer not to necessarily build in or increase the density in. We have to sort of manage those two priorities of increasing density and increasing the affordability and attainability of the housing in our area, but also making sure that we're not building in high-risk areas. And with all of that, we also have to continue to increase our ability to manage the stormwater and wastewater and all of the public infrastructure needed to support all of those new residents.
I mean, really, that's the challenge of the future. We have a lot of great rules and regulations in place, but how do we deal with this huge population growth because everybody wants to move to Florida? That's our challenge.
And if some of those improvements aren't made by, say, the year 2050, what are some potential consequences that we might experience in this area?
We're continuing to see flooding on a daily basis, so we would expect that to potentially get worse. We would potentially see property damages, damages to our vehicles and to our businesses, and of course that's going to impact and potentially influence loss of life.
Gotcha. And speaking of life, Paul, you have some experience with dealing with those kind of things firsthand.
Yes, I have. I've probably treated between 60 and 100 people for heat exhaustion and 3 people for heat stroke. The most recent one was a 17-year-old football player who collapsed during his second practice of the day in August. And when he got to us, his internal temperature was 107 and he was in a coma. There are 6 major ways in which climate change is affecting the health of people, and I want to emphasize this today. Not in 10 years, not in 20, it is affecting people's health today. Those are heat waves, air pollution, major storms and downpours, etc., vectors of disease, and by that I'm predominantly talking about ticks and mosquitoes, increasing their market share, increasing their geographic area. Waterborne diseases, toxic algae like blue-green algae and red tide, and mental health effects.
Well, I'm really curious about the last one, actually. How would someone's mental health be impacted by their exposure to climate change's effects?
Well, with increasing heat, typically comes increasing tendency toward anger, violence, etc. And people who went through Katrina, just as one example, were much more likely, and I saw numbers, people who were relocated and living in temporary shelters after Katrina were something like 78 times more likely to attempt suicide than comparable aged people who did not go through that experience. So people who are displaced suffer increased anxiety, increased depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal thoughts, etc. As another example, and children who experienced the Cat 5 Hurricane Michael that hit the Panhandle, their school teachers reported even months or a year later that they had to be consoled and counseled when there was only a minor rainstorm. So these kind of experiences stay with you and they impact children very significantly.
And then you have a lot of work experience with weather, right? And you know some of the future weather patterns that we might experience. Is this phenomenon going to stop soon, or is it going to get worse?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've done a lot of work in the climate change and climate science arena. We've been seeing recently, over the past 100 years or so, we've seen an increase of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit on the global average. And here in Florida, that's about the same. So 2 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't really sound like a whole lot, but if it's 2 degrees on your body temperature, that's a whole fever right there. And we on this planet are running a fever. That fever means that there's more times where we are sort of experiencing these very intense periods of heat in the United States, and in particularly in Florida. And that can lead to some of the heat stress events that was just discussed.
And so sea level rise is interesting because we are in a really interesting area as it pertains to our elevation, right? So let's say we fast forward a couple of decades. Given the current trends of sea level rise, where should we expect things to be?
Well, we talked about already the Tampa Bay area is having sunny day flooding events, where on a simple high tide, the neighborhoods can get backed up with tidal water coming in the bay or the Gulf. That's only going to increase. As we have a higher tide on our coastal beaches, that is one of the big economic engines that help drive the Tampa Bay area. We would be concerned with additional erosion along those beaches as well. And as a marine biologist, we look at things like seagrass beds and oyster communities. Will they be able to migrate? Will the salt marsh and mangroves be able to move uphill as sea level rises in the future as well? Because it is critical that we maintain those communities in the bay if we want to be able to maintain those water quality benefits that we all enjoy.
All right. And Dan, do you have any additional insights?
Yeah, so the type of changes that we're seeing in the Tampa Bay area are something like 7 inches over the last 70 years. And we would expect that trend to continue or even accelerate going into the next few decades. By 2050, we could be seeing changes on the order of a foot. And that's a pretty significant change in sea levels. We found in a study of Hurricane Sandy in 2019 that only 4 inches of sea level rise from human-caused climate change caused about $8 billion worth of damage during Hurricane Sandy. And so 12 inches of water here in the Tampa Bay region is significant. Of course, we're very low-lying. And those changes are relatively locked in. The ocean takes a long time to respond to the way we sort of push it around. As we increase the amount of emissions of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, that increases the temperature of the atmosphere, but also the ocean. And the ocean kind of takes a little while to catch up to the atmosphere that's sort of pushing it ahead. And that means that what we are experiencing over the next 20 years is kind of baked into what we've already done. But we still have decisions to make going forward, I should say. Through 2050, we can expect about the same level of sea level rise that we experienced over the last 30 years, sort of continuing to the next 20. But going beyond that, it really is up to our decisions. If we choose to reduce our emissions really drastically, we could see less than 3 feet of sea level by the end of the century, or we could see quite a bit more than that if we choose not to reduce our emissions. So the choice is really with us.
In my city, in Tarpon Springs, we have sunny day flooding frequently, and it impacts, in the past week, impacts some of the thoroughfare streets that lead from downtown in the city, but also lead to the beaches. And so getting to the beaches, or getting to the main part of the tourist part of town was not possible. That impacts the economy very strongly. So what we're doing, or at least our plan is, and the engineering plan is to raise the shoreline along that bayou, but also put in a living shoreline in addition to that, with hard structures, with oyster shells, plus spartina, which is cordgrass, plus mangroves.
All right, so if everyone could imagine a Tampa Bay area in the future that solved a lot of these problems with infrastructure and maybe some of the climate adaptation and mitigation measures that we're taking, what would that look like?
I can take a punch at that, I guess. It would have affordable housing that's attainable for everyone. It would have really efficient multimodal transportation systems, and it would have growth patterns that are really complementary to our natural systems. It would have businesses that can bounce back from any storm or natural event or even cyber attack. And it would have equitable outcomes from disaster recovery and disaster preparedness for all of our residents.
I think if I could build on that a little bit. We need to become a carbon neutral society. I think more and more we're starting to recognize that this is a real problem. We all need to take a certain amount of personal responsibility to help reduce our carbon footprint and to work with companies and industry to reduce theirs as well. But as we look around Tampa Bay, we need to continue to restore those habitats that are so important for the Bay, for the long-term protection of our resources, and realize that it's not here just for us. We need to consider the future generations and be able to hand off to them something that they can build upon and grow upon and enjoy as much as we have during our lifetime.
I think one of the main things that, I would see the future of the Tampa Bay region looking like that is sort of better in addressing climate change is just like a community and conversation. Just start talking about it. Go to your community members, go to your local coffee shop or your faith-based community. Talk with the people that you're in conversation with every day. Climate change is here to stay. We are already being impacted by the effects of it. We will continue to be impacted. It'll have negative health outcomes or negative economic impacts. So we need to be talking about this. I'm so excited as a part of the planning because it really says that we've had those conversations at that level, but we also in our communities need to be having these conversations as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all so much for weighing in with your super interesting insights in this. And thank you all for being here and for your efforts in the fight against climate change.
Thank you.